What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the reveal of the number 10 team in my 2019 NFL Power Rankings with a deep dive into the Seattle Seahawks. And last year, the big networks, ESPN, NFL, they were ranking this team in the 20s. They said, well, Michael Bennett's gone, Richard Sherman's gone, Cam Chancellor's gone, Earl Thomas is holding out. There's no way this team's a playoff team. I put him at 12th. I said you got a certain floor when you have this culture and Russell Wilson, and sure enough, that's about where they finished up with a wild card game, even though they did lose in the first round. Now, the conversation as we head into next year is not if they can get into the playoffs here, but can they really elevate and be a more legitimate Super Bowl contender? Because while this team was a pleasant surprise last year, you really didn't have a ton of people picking this team to win 2 or 3 road playoff games and get into the big game. So this video is going to be all about, do they have that upside? Can they get there? Who's going to have to break out in order for that to happen? So if you enjoy, if you learn something, please do hit that like button. It's the easiest way to share the video and support my channel. Also subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the reveals in the top 10. Also, if you want to support the channel, if you're shopping for tickets, use promo code ThatFranchiseGuy on SeatGeek. You will save $20 on your first purchase and get the best prices there anyway, so go check that out. If you're new to the series, what we do here is we go through the roster, we rank each position, how they stack up against the rest of the league. While we do that, you will be looking at my own custom Madden rosters. So while that is a video game, they are my own ratings, and it's a nice little graphic to show how I perceive each player. After that, we go through the schedule game by game, talk about this team's over, under, and my win total expectations. And now that we're into the top 10, we are, of course, going to have to talk about Super Bowl odds, division odds, all that good stuff. So make sure you stick around to the end of the video to get all of that stuff. So we ranked the Seahawks 10th, and we ranked the offense tied for 12th. But before we go through this roster, I really need to prep here by saying that this is one of the most unique and almost unpredictable offenses in the league. They have a very unique style, I would say, outside of the Baltimore Ravens, who are seemingly going to just run a triple option with a running back playing quarterback next season. The Seahawks probably have the second most unique offense. They know what they can and cannot do with this team, and they know what they have to do because they have such a great defense here, especially when they're playing at home, that they know they don't need to put up 30, 35 points. So this offense wants to run the ball, and they want to run play action and take deep shots. They don't want to come out here and nickel and dime you, have 15, 16 play drives. I mean, obviously, if they're running the ball, they would like to do that, but this offense is almost a chunk play offense. They run the ball to set up big plays, and this whole offense has really had the personnel to do this over the last 3 or 4 years, but I think even more now than ever, they have recognized that this is really their formula on offense. So their wide receivers are big, physical, vertical threats who can run block as well. They do not pump a lot into the offensive line because a lot of their big plays come off of play action and getting Russell Wilson outside of the pocket. And then they have a lot of running backs here, and they want to run the ball very well. So yes, we rank them tied for 12th. What the big conversation is going to be here is, in year 2 of Brian Schottenheimer's offense, can this become an offense that can consistently get over that 20-point mark? Because over the last few years, this is a team that, yes, they will have those big weeks, but because of this style, if either the run game or, corners are able to shut down those deep passes, this is an offense that doesn't really have much of a counterpunch. So they're really going to have to be elite at what they do this year. So let's go through this and talk about if they can do that. And you will always give this team the benefit of the doubt with Russell Wilson at quarterback, who comes in for me tied for 3rd. A big debate this offseason: is Russell Wilson better? Is Andrew Luck better? Well, little spoiler alert here, I have them both tied for 3rd. I stay away from that debate because Russell Wilson and Andrew Luck, to me, they're stylistically so different, it is almost impossible to compare these guys. To me, both the Colts fans and Seahawks fans should just be happy that you have an elite quarterback, a guy that can genuinely carry a team no matter what the surrounding talent is, and just be happy that you have one of those guys. If you want to compare the two, Andrew Luck probably a little more efficient in the short game, slightly better processor or be able to go through those quick reads. Russell Wilson, more of the elite play extender, more accurate downfield. Not that either of them are bad in the opposite regard, but I will say if there is a criticism of Russell Wilson, it's that he's not going to nickel and dime you. He's not going to be Tom Brady, Matt Ryan out here and, get rid of the ball quickly consistently and pick up 4 or 5 yard passes all the time. What Russell Wilson brings to the table is that ability to elude pressure, get outside the pocket, and throw just absolute frozen ropes to these wide receivers that have very good vertical ability. Again, it's not that he's not a bad pocket passer, but that is not his strength, and it probably never will be. But the traits that make Russell Wilson so great are what lead him to be a top 5 quarterback, in my opinion. It's a big reason I was confident ranking this team in the top 12 last year, because he really is that special. Even if his stats don't back everything up, like you can just see it on the field, this guy is an absolute problem. And you are never out of any game when number 3 is your quarterback. Behind him, you do have Geno Smith. He's been kind of bounced around the league. He was backing up Phillip Rivers there with the Chargers. I'm not going to say this team can't win, half their games in like a month stretch with Geno Smith. Say Russell Wilson had a little minor injury, had to miss a few games. I think that Geno could come in here in this scheme with his mobility and, just kind of exist, and hopefully the defense can do their job. A lot of teams, if you lose your quarterback for 4 to 6 weeks, the season's over. I think this team with a mobile quarterback like Geno Smith could maybe, hold on and, win a game or two in that stretch. So you could do worse there. And then Paxton Lynch, they're going to try to, resurrect his career. I don't expect that to happen. So again, tied for 3rd at quarterback. It's a big reason this team comes in the top 10 is Russell Wilson. Then we're going to talk about this running back situation where they come in, for me, tied for 13th. And Chris Carson, still the starter here. Pete Carroll preaches this culture where it doesn't matter where we got you. If you come in and compete and win the job, you're going to be the guy. And that's what happened last year. And he's a beast. But I do need to say I have a ton of hesitation on if he can reproduce what he did last year. For one, you've already got the looming kind of history of a Thomas Rawls who was incredibly similar. Rawls was an undrafted guy, Chris Carson a 7th round pick, both power backs, both not great receivers out of the backfield. And now with Chris Carson going through surgery this offseason, I believe that's on his shoulder or his knee, that's going to open the door for Rashad Penny. And you look also at like Alex Collins in Baltimore, the same exact thing. Ravens fans loved Alex Collins. Now we don't even talk about the guy. Rob Kelly, another example there in Washington. These, overly physical running backs, not only do they have a propensity to get hurt early on, but more importantly, these teams don't have anything invested in these guys. They don't owe them anything. And especially when you have a guy like Rashad Penny, who this team spent a 1st-round pick on, they're going to be paying for the next 3 years, 4 years if they decide to pick up his 5th-year option, which could turn into a bargain for them. They are going to feel very inclined to go to Rashad Penny much more this year, in my opinion, especially if Penny's getting all the reps in training camp. So if you want to talk about fantasy football, I'm not touching Chris Carson. I would be terrified of him just becoming an afterthought here. All that said, I do think Chris Carson is more physically gifted than those other names we mentioned earlier. He really is a full steam ahead. Honestly, shows some little flashes of like Adrian Peterson. He is a very powerful runner. And I think the more likely scenario here is that these guys are just a really nice 1-2 punch. Neither of them maybe stand out statistically to you. And the thing with Rashad Penny, though, is he does offer a lot more as a wide receiver. He caught the ball very smooth out of the backfield in college. I expect him to do that here. So I do think the most likely scenario here is a 1-2 punch. Maybe Carson gets a few less carries than last year to try and keep him a little healthier. They get Rashad Penny some more carries after he supposedly has lost some weight. Could be a little more shifty, quick, elusive, all that. I was a big Rashad Penny truther coming out of college. I don't know if I would have spent a 1st-round pick on him But I do expect this to be a very good running back room regardless. And you have depth. J.D. McKissic, a true third down back, shifty receiver out of the backfield. C.J. Prosise, he's just made of glass, but honestly, when he's healthy, he looks like a top 20 running back in the NFL at least. Clearly, they believe in his talent if he could just stay healthy because he's still on this roster. And then they draft Travis Homer as well in the 6th round. They clearly want to make sure they have a receiving threat because Chris Carson just does not succeed in that regard at all. And that's another big reason that I think eventually he will get phased out here because in the modern game, this is a very smart front office as well. You want a back that doesn't key what you want to do. When Chris Carson's on the field, defenses just don't have to worry about him as much from a coverage standpoint. That could be the case with Rashad Penny. You also have Bo Scarborough here. Just keep an eye on him. This team has done a really good job with guys like Chris Carson, Thomas Rawls, even Alex Collins left this team, went to Baltimore. Bo Scarborough fits in that same mold of just the really physical guy, though he might not have the same work ethic as like a former 5-star recruit out of Alabama. So the running back room for me tied for 13th. So then we get to the wide receiver room here, and this is such an interesting group of wide receivers to me. They come in tied for 17th, and a lot of that is Tyler Lockett. Now, I was wrong about Tyler Lockett. I'm ready to admit that. I criticized this team when they gave him a $30 million contract over 3 years. I saw him before this season as a guy that is a really good slot receiver, a guy like a Kiki Kuti, Kendall Wright, if you will, a kick returner. Not someone that I thought could really open up the field and return dividends over $10 million, and that's going to continue to be a bad take for the next 2 years while he is now a total bargain, and I don't see him holding out because he only has 2 more years left. At some point, they are going to have to pay him. But he just proved me wrong. He was dominant as a deep threat last year. He does still play well in the slot. He is the only guy on this roster really that can move around and play any position. So he does have to stay healthy because that has been a bit of a problem for him throughout his career. But last year he stayed healthy. He used the entire field. His route tree was just awesome. It looks like a great route runner. But most surprisingly was his ability to track the ball as a deep threat. Deshaun Jackson-esque plays as a deep threat there. So you love what you have in Tyler Lockett. And, it's not a very high volume passing offense. So I don't know if he is ever going to get these stats for people, majority of the NFL are just going to look at the stats and make their rankings off of that. He's probably never going to get into that top 10, even top 15 conversation in terms of his production. But that was always kind of the case with Doug Baldwin as well, who is gone now, by the way. So now you have to look at the rest of these wide receivers, and they're all pretty much the same guy. It's kind of weird. So like DK Metcalf, freak athlete, straight line deep threat. You can get him really going here on like deep crossing routes off of play action, which I think is going to be lethal with this team. And I do believe in DK Metcalf as an impact as a rookie. I don't know how much production he's going to have. Again, it's a low passing volume offense, and he is going to be pretty one-dimensional. But I think he will make 5 or 6 big-time, huge impact chunk plays this year because he's just such a freak. And the ball placement downfield by Russell Wilson, who, by the way, happens to be probably the most accurate deep ball quarterback in the NFL right now, it's going to be fun to watch. And I do expect him to win that number 2 wide receiver job. And then you have Jerron Brown, David Moore, very similar players. Again, deep threats, both pretty good run blockers. They fit exactly what this team is looking to do. I think either of them could be serviceable within this scheme as a number 3 wide receiver there as deep threats. Then you got Amara Darboh. He really hasn't done anything after being a 3rd-round pick in 2017. Would be pretty surprising to see a breakout from him at this point. They took Gary Jennings in the 4th round. I think Jerron Brown, not a terrible comparison for Gary Jennings. Very fast, straight-line runner, super physical run blocker. A perfect fit for what this team wants to do, but he is a little redundant with what you already have on the roster. The only guy really left here that I have my eye on to be anything more than that big body deep threat is John Ursua, who was a 7th round pick out of Hawaii. I didn't personally love this player. He seemed like a dime a dozen slot guy. But if anything happens to Tyler Lockett, I really do think they would have to go to either John Ursua or pick someone up. Because at some point you do need a guy that can run a quick out or an option route to get this team a passing completion on 3rd and 3. It can't all be play action deep shots here, right? So you got to keep Tyler Lockett healthy here if you want this offense to click. But I do think with DK Metcalf in here, you have a certain upside with this deep passing game to offer an even more consistent element to that part of this team that hasn't really been there in the past. So it's a bit of a wait and see approach, but I do believe in DK Metcalf making an impact as a rookie, and I think 2 or 3 years from now, he could get into that conversation for one of the 10 to 20 best wide receivers in the NFL. And then at tight end, there's not a whole lot to speak of. Will Dissly, a 4th round pick last year, was widely considered to be just a blocking specialist, and he came out and really produced in the passing game. Now, a lot of those were big passing plays that were pretty inconsistent with his college tape, so we'll see if he continues to be an impact in the receiving game. To me, he's a really good blocker, a guy that doesn't have a bad pair of hands by any means, but he's not a great athlete. I don't see him being a consistent receiving threat here. You have Ed Dickson, solid number 2 guy, good athlete, decent blocker, not much of a wide receiver. They will use him in that role, but he's nothing to really move the needle there as a tight end. You got Nick Vanette, Jacob Hollister. These guys are more receiving types. You don't have a bad group of tight ends here, but none of these guys really move the needle for me unless Will Dissly just somehow continues that weird production he had to start last year before he left for the season. So the wide receiver room comes in tied for 17th. Certainly not a bad group of wide receivers. I do have some worries about who's moving the chains outside of Tyler Lockett in the short game. But again, that's not really the identity of this offense in the first place. And then you get the offensive line here, still a very big concern for me. They haven't done a whole lot to address this situation that has been a mess over the last few years. So they're going to come in 27th for me. You love having Dwayne Brown there as a rock at left tackle. That has got to be one of the worst trades in the last 10 years in the NFL, behind the Khalil Mack trade from the Raiders. You don't trade a franchise left tackle in his prime like Dwayne Brown, Houston. This is a big reason I think they fired their general manager. So a great move by the Seahawks to come and get this guy. Yeah, he's a little bit older, but he's still one of the best tackles in the NFL, and this team has definitely gotten their dividends for making that move. Now, other than Dwayne Brown, you got a ton of question marks. Right tackle, Jermaine Ifedi, he just made my list of most overrated players, of the most overrated player on this Seahawks team. He's just a bit of a turnstile at right tackle. Like, he's a low level starter. He's one of the 5 worst starting tackles in the NFL. You do have a good center in Justin Britt, though he has had his struggles over the last couple years after a really good start to his career. And then you got really just some average veterans there at guard. DJ Fluker had a good year last year, but he's a pretty one-dimensional, stonewalling pass blocker. Really just a power pass blocker. You don't want him going up against some of these quicker interior guys. When he sees Aaron Donald, he is going to have just a nightmare. Everyone really does, but Fluker specifically just doesn't move his feet very quick. And then Mike Iupati, if he can stay healthy, that is going to be a good signing, but there's no reason to really believe that he is going to stay healthy for the whole season. He can still play. He's not some great guard, but he's certainly an upgrade from what they had last year, if healthy, even though it's not huge. So the guard depth, you got Ethan Pochik, Phil Haynes, a 4th-round pick, kind of whatever there. It's not going to really help this team out. Tackle depth, you do have George Fant, an interesting player who you could have even mentioned in the tight end room. This team wants to run the ball, right? A lot. And George Fant is going to play a lot as this team's 2nd or 3rd tight end in heavy packages. Do I expect a tackle to be an impact in the receiving game? No. Do I expect a guy that's taking a lot of practice reps at tight end to beat out a guy like Germain Ifedi as a starting tackle? No, not really. So he's just an interesting piece, a really fun athlete, but not someone that I think at the end of the day plays a huge impact on this team, even though he may be a very fun player. The wild card here is Jamarco Jones. This team had a ton of optimism last year. He tore his ACL in the preseason. He was actually looking like someone that might be coming for Germain Ifedi's job, which Seahawks fans have been waiting for someone to do that for a long time. So can he come off that ACL, a fifth-round pick last season, and take that right tackle job and be a good player? That would certainly be a wild card here. Not something I'd expect to happen, but it is in the realm of possibilities, I suppose. So 27th for offensive line. It comes in this tier of offensive lines that is going to hurt this team, and it is going to lead to a lot of inconsistencies on this offense. So like we said, we rank this offense 12th. The upside certainly there with Russell Wilson, with this vertical passing game, with these running backs, not really with the offensive line. But I think we do still see some weeks, even though it may be less weeks of this, as we've seen over the last few years, of them really almost putting up an egg. We've seen this offense, despite having Russell Wilson, just not be able to really move the ball and score 12, 15 points. I think we're still going to see some of that because of this offensive line, because of the style of offense that this team wants to go with, which is run the ball and take shots. Now, there's going to be weeks, too, where if you're going against a worse pass rush or you have really garbage corners that can't run down the field, this offense is going to look really, really good. But if you're going against a team that really gets to Russell Wilson in a hurry and can keep him in the pocket and shut down this run game and contain these wide receivers down the field, then it is going to you are going to have some inconsistent weeks. So they come in 12th for me, but that's a very fluctuant team. Now, when you have a fluctuant team like that, you would say, okay, they've got a pretty low floor, right? No, this team has a very, very high floor because this defense, it really doesn't matter who's on the field. When they are playing at home, they are a top 5 defense. It is the culture they've established here. I mean, seriously, the scheme that Pete Carroll and this staff really established here has changed the way modern defenses look and feel. Multiple trends have been started right here in Seattle. You've got the bigger-bodied edge rusher that is going to come inside and rush the passer on the interior. A guy like Michael Bennett that this team had, that every team now has a guy like this that they push inside on third down. That trend was started by Seattle. You have the bandit safety, the Cam Chancellor role in this defense, that every team in the NFL now has a guy who is listed as a safety but plays more linebacker than safety. A lot of teams in the NFL have Seattle disciples here who are replicating the bigger-bodied corner who might not be much of a man defender, not very good agility scores, but just as a vertical defender who you try to keep outside of the hash marks as much as possible can really dominate. Those things are all trends being copied by the rest of the NFL, and they're all things that Seattle does here better than anyone, and Pete Carroll coaches those roles better than anyone. So you're going to give this team the benefit of the doubt with a lot of these players developing. So while, yes, Cam Chancellor's gone, Earl Thomas is gone, Richard Sherman's gone, Michael Bennett's gone, you got to keep in mind that those players were not highly regarded, like any of them. Chancellor was, a 6th, 7th round pick. Sherman, a 5th round pick. Hell, even Bobby Wagner here, a 2nd round pick. He's just kind of a special kind of animal. Michael Bennett was a pretty cheap free agent pickup. Earl Thomas was a 1st round pick. But, as we go through this roster, there is some optimism now with some of these rookies and then second-year players that they can get some of these guys to step up. And if this team wants to get into that Super Bowl conversation, at the end of the day, we've talked about some of the inconsistencies that this offense will have, and it's not going to be a bad offense. But if they want to be a Super Bowl team, they got to get back to a top 5 defense and get some of these guys to really emerge as star players outside of Bobby Wagner. And right now I have them tied for 8th, so I don't think they're that far off. They just need 1 or 2 of these guys to really break out. So let's start up front with the run defense. We'll go through this pretty quickly. We don't put a lot of weight in run defense, but this team will be able to stop the run. It's just a nasty physical culture, and that's really where playing run defense starts. You've got Poona Ford. Just seriously, every NFL general manager that has not caught up to the fact that having a 5'11", 6-foot defensive tackle is a good thing. Yes, it is traditionally an undersized player. If you have an old school coach, they might say, oh, we want all our D tackles to be 6'4" because that's the way it's always been done. Just wake up. When you're that small, you have a leverage advantage. It's that simple. And when you're a freak athlete like Poona Ford, you're just an absolute handful. And I was not surprised in the slightest to see a guy like him who did nothing but dominate in college come in and play at a high level right away. He was one of the best rookie players in the NFL last year. The only reason he went undrafted is because he's 5'11", but he is really, really good and is a player that everyone needs to keep an eye on, because I don't think many people are aware that Poona Ford is one of the best up-and-coming interior defensive linemen in the NFL. As a run defender and a pass rusher, he's a 3-way player. So you love what you have in Poona Ford there. Jaron Reed, just really solid. Again, kind of a 3-down interior guy, not a freak athlete, but just pretty technically sound. Not uber explosive, but he'll play the run well. And then you also have Al Woods. So, this team is one of the smartest front offices in the NFL, right? Year after year, they prove that. What are some of the things we keep saying in these deep dives? Number 1, get yourself undersized, traditionally undersized interior defensive linemen like Poona Ford, and just don't invest highly in interior defensive linemen. Poona Ford, undrafted last year. Al Woods, one of the best run-defending nose tackles in the NFL. They pick him up for literally nothing, replicating what Indianapolis did with him the year before. It blows my mind that there's still teams spending first-round picks on nose tackles in the NFL right now. So, you got 3 really good run defenders there. And then it also is helped on the edge. The nice thing about this Seattle scheme is these bigger-bodied edge defenders on first and second down really do a good job of shutting down the run and getting this defense to third down, which is what the NFL is all about. So you got LJ Collier, you have Rasheem Green on the edge, 2 bigger-bodied guys, more veteran guys, Brandon Jackson, Quentin Jefferson, good against the run. All of those guys will play a lot on first and second down. And then, of course, you got Bobby Wagner. That never hurts either. And then you do have some more interior depth as well. Jamie Meter, a veteran, and DeMarcus Christmas, a 6th-round pick. Also Nazir Jones, a 3rd-round pick in 2017 that this team is trying to still develop and get something from him. So a very good run defense here. Going to come in tied for 11th. And then you got to talk about the pass rush. And I do have some current concerns about this pass rush. They let Frank Clark go because they were not comfortable paying him what he was going to demand. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with that, because I don't know if Frank Clark is the caliber to pay some, he's getting paid pretty similar to what Khalil Mack gets. And he's not that caliber of player. He's not even what DeMarcus Lawrence is for Dallas. So I understand letting him go, but he was a massive impact for this team last year, and a big reason this team was a playoff team last year. So they're going to have to find a way to replicate that pass rush, I think, if they're going to get into the playoffs. I think that's a big thing they got to do here. I'm not saying they can't do it, but you're projecting a lot here. You have LJ Collier, a 1st-round pick this year. A lot of people thought was a reach. You obviously are always going to give this Seattle team the benefit of the doubt. And even though I had a day 3 grade on LJ Collier, or at least a 3rd-round grade, a late 3rd, you do got to admit he's the perfect scheme fit here. He's going to play that Michael Bennett role as that edge guy on first and second down. He can push the pocket if they do decide to pass from the edge, but you can also move him inside as a 3-tech on 3rd down and really, has some upside as a 3-down player there in this scheme. You have Rasheem Green, who was a 3rd-round pick last year. To me, he is the wild card. Can he reach that freak potential, a USC player? Pete Carroll's had success with those USC guys. Yes, you have Ziggy Ansah here. To me, that's whatever. You know what he is. He's a speed rusher. He's a cleanup guy who can get sacks while other people get the pressures. But can Rasheem Green establish himself here so that your 3rd and 8 package is like some combination of Ziggy Ansah, Poona Ford, LJ Collier, and Rasheem Green? That could be a pretty good pass rush there. I don't think that will ever be a top 10 pass rush because you just don't have that true number 1 guy, and that was why I didn't love the LJ Collier pick, because he's a versatile player and a great fit in this scheme, but I don't think he's ever going to be what you had in Frank Clark. So there may be a bit of a transition here with this defense, trying to figure out who's getting after the quarterback. You got other names as well. Cassius Marsh, a bit of a speed rusher off the edge. You have Jacob Martin, a uber athletic 6th round pick last year. Hell, maybe they even get Shaquem Griffin going on some blitz packages. But you just have a lot of questions about this pass rush. And while this scheme is fantastic and you have Bobby Wagner in the middle there, you know, at the end of the day, when this Seahawks team was elite and one of the 3 best defenses in NFL history with the Legion of Boom, yeah, they had great secondary players, they had a great second level with these linebackers, but they also had Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill as really a top 5 edge rush duo as well. And they're going to have to find something like that this year, and I just don't know if it's on the roster right now. You also got to say Barkevious Mingo's name. He's kind of a flex hybrid player here, which is a good transition here to linebacker, which is going to be the number 1 linebacker room in the NFL. Bobby Wagner and Luke Kuechly, to me, very close. You give Bobby Wagner the nod because of durability. Like, he's just ridiculous, and he's a big reason we were comfortable ranking this team in the top 12 last year, is because Bobby Wagner just changes the game. He himself makes it hard to run the ball because the second you try to go outside the tackles, he's going to shut that thing down immediately. But what he offers as a just smart and, more importantly, probably an uber athletic cover guy, can get sideline to sideline at the snap of a finger. He never misses a tackle. Like, the guy is just utterly ridiculous, and the flexibility he allows this team to have in coverage is just such an asset. And he is coming up on a contract. If I'm Bobby Wagner, I am going to, in a way, hold this team hostage and say, I need to be paid like a Khalil Mack. I know that CJ Mosley just set the market at like $16 million for my position, but I am so much better than CJ Mosley. I am one of the 5 best defensive players in this league, and I should be paid like one of the 5 best defensive players in this league. So we'll see what happens with his contract. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. He changes the game for this team. And I keep saying that linebackers are just innately underpaid. So I am curious to see if he can kind of change that conversation from a contract agent speak kind of thing. And then you've got a ton of depth behind Bobby Wagner. We don't say that about a lot of teams. You got KJ Wright still there. Great player on the opposite side of 30 now, and has had a lot of injury stuff the last couple of years. So anything you get from him would be great. I would say he probably plays between 6 and 12 games, but they have the depth to survive that when he's gone. You've got Michael Kendricks, who can absolutely play. Next to Bobby Wagner, you could do a hell of a lot worse than Michael Kendricks, who would be a lot of teams' best linebacker. Then you have 2 really good rookies that I liked. I actually like Ben Burr-Kirven, who they got in the 5th round, a little more. He's a smaller guy, just a great sideline-to-sideline cover guy. He's okay against the run as well. We'll see if that transitions to the NFL, but I love that pick. I think he could be a great player here, and ultimately I actually think he's going to be the guy that becomes Bobby Wagner's running mate. Especially because Wagner has that size to thump. You can limit some of those weaknesses that Kirven might have as a smaller guy. And then they took Cody Barton in the 3rd round, who's a freak athlete, a little bit of a bigger body guy, but he's a good player as well. I'm not trying to write him off. I just really liked Ben Burr-Kirven. And then they have Austin Calitro there as well, Shaquem Griffin. We already mentioned Barkevious Mingo. You got Jacob Martin. Those guys are kind of flex players. You just got a ton of depth. It's really not even that close to me that this team is the best linebacker room in the entire NFL. And then you get to the secondary here, and I have questions here as well. And the big problem I have here is I don't really see anyone here emerging to a star impact level. You have Shaquem Griffin, who really was in consideration for me for the most overrated player on this team. The reason I left him off is he's only in his third year, and we've seen a lot of third-year corners take a big step up. So it's going to be a make or break season for me with Shaquille Griffin, but he really did struggle last year. And then, he's your number one corner. Next to him, you have Trey Flowers, who, had a great rookie season. He was one of the better rookie corners, by like PFF last year. I still don't fully believe in this thing. He is a converted big-bodied safety. When this team took him in the 5th round, it felt like he was going to be the, Cam Chancellor role here as that stiff box safety who's really good against the run. They stick him outside at corner, and he was pretty good last year, but he's really terrible in man just coverage, and I know this team doesn't run a lot of man coverage. He's a great press guy, and he should only continue to get better, right? But I just have a lot of questions on if he's a guy that teams are going to be able to exploit in the vertical game, in breaking routes. Like, I think that this is a guy that teams are going to have their eye on as someone they can target in the secondary this year, especially if this pass rush isn't as good as it was last year without Frank Clark, because, he's really good in press. He can take you out for the first 2 seconds, but after that, once you get to your first break, I'm really curious to see how he holds up next year. The depth behind him is terrible. They signed Jamar Taylor. He's probably going to compete in the nickel here because this team has traditionally had a height cutoff at 6 feet tall as their outside corner position. So you're looking at Akeem King, Nico Thorpe, Kalen Reed. Like, it's just not a good look at this cornerback room. I was actually really surprised that this team did not use one of their many picks that they had acquired after trading down on one of these bigger-bodied corners. A guy like Jawan Williams, or the guy that Houston got, his name's escaping me, out of Kentucky. There was other guys later in the draft as well. Just any of these guys that could come in here and compete. I was really surprised that this team felt as comfortable in their outside corner room as they do. Now, I did love the Ugo Amadi pick. Like we said, this team has traditionally had a height cutoff at corner, but Justin Coleman, seeing what he did here for this team in the nickel at 5'11", I think really opened this team's mind a little bit, especially after they've seen so many nickel corners throughout the league produce at 5'9". Guys like Bryce Callahan, Tyrann Mathieu. There's a long list of nickel corners who are undersized guys, and this is a very smart front office that is not going to just ignore league trends like that. So I thought this was one of their best picks. He is an uber instinctive playmaker in the nickel. He should start right away. He's a guy I look at as a guy that could have that Desmond King type of impact as a rookie, just as a playmaker in a position that gets targeted a lot, especially as rookies. Teams just like to attack rookie corners in general, but with these short passing games in the NFL right now, that's a position that gets targeted a lot. So keep an eye on Ugo Amadi here to be the Justin Coleman replacement, and I actually don't think you're going to get a huge drop-off at that nickel corner position because of that. You got a decent player in Jamar Taylor that can compete there as well. But I do think they've done a good job to supplement the loss of Justin Coleman, who got absolutely paid by the Detroit Lions. And then at safety, you got Bradley McDougald there. He's one of the breakout players last year. He's a good player, and he's a great fit in this scheme. But this team is kind of still looking for that free safety year. They had Tedrick Thompson there last year. They draft Marquise Blair in the 2nd round. He was their guy. Clearly, we'll see what he can do. If he can win this free safety job, that would certainly be a wild card here. To me, a comparison for him was Adrian Amos coming out, really downhill type of free safety, has some range, and can really come up and hit you as well. So he could certainly win that job out. He is a 2nd round rookie, so you don't guarantee that, but he's definitely a wild card and one of these guys that I look at and say if he could really be a great impact as a rookie, that's when this defense could really take that step up into the top 5, because that free safety position is incredibly important for this scheme and the flexibility of their play calling. And I don't know if Tedrick Thompson is the kind of player that can really allow that flexibility. And they'll even use Bradley McDougald as the high safety a lot too. Then the depth stinks. You got Delano Hill, Shalom Luani, Marwin Evans. Like, it's really just those first three names we were talking about. So the secondary, a major concern. The defense, like we said, comes in tied for 8th. You give this team the benefit of the doubt. When they're at home, they are lethal. Pete Carroll, excellent at coaching these guys up. And this is a very young defense. You've got LJ Collier, Ugo Amadi, both project to be starters as rookies. You got those 2 linebackers, Burke Irvin, Cody Barton, and then Marquise Blair at safety. Like, you got 5 names there that could make surprising impacts as rookies. And that's really where I'm pointing to this team and saying, can you get this team to emerge into that top 5 elite defense that is going to push this team to that next level, I think. So let's now take a look at the schedule here. And this team really got a bad break with the schedule, in my opinion. You know, first half's not terrible. You like to get the Saints at home. You play the Rams at home earlier. Like, I've got them starting 5-2. But the problem here is this Seahawks team, as we've kind of hinted at, it's not a team that I really trust on the road. For one, it's a defensive team. That defensive teams always play better at home. For 2, this team has a disproportionate advantage to the rest of the league with how good their home field advantage is. It's something very similar to what we said about the Minnesota Vikings. Like, they're just such a different team at home than they are on the road. And the third biggest reason for that is that offensive lines just don't travel. When the other team has that crowd noise, your snap count is predictable, and pass rushes have the advantage. And when they already have the advantage on your offensive line, which is going to be the case in 90% of this team's games, if not more, it is going to make things very hard and inconsistent for this team. So to have to go to Philadelphia, go to Carolina, go to Cleveland, go to Atlanta, go to Pittsburgh, that's a terrible draw for this team. You got to get 1 or 2 of those games at home, as opposed to getting Cincinnati at home, Tampa Bay at home, Baltimore at home. Those are teams that this team could go on the road and beat. So that's the perfect example here of why, yeah, I rank this team higher than the Steelers and the 49ers. But I had those teams winning 12 games because they just had a much more favorable schedule. So it's a pretty tough draw for the Seahawks, for a team that didn't even win their division next year. I think this team's going to win less games than they did last year, even if they're a better football team at the end of the day. That's just a pretty unfortunate draw with their schedule. So I've got them going 9-7. Win range is 7-10 for me. You're really going to have to find a way to win at Cleveland, win at Atlanta, win at Carolina. And, you know, they have Russell Wilson at quarterback, so that's not something they're incapable of doing. You're in every single game when that man is your quarterback. But, man, that's a lot of really difficult road games that I'm not fully confident in saying this team can win right now. So, you know, beyond the over-under that I'm kind of staying away from, their division odds, 3-1. I see this division as a bit of a 3-sided die. You know, I like San Francisco a lot this year, and I'd much more advise taking them at over 5-1, with a more favorable schedule. But the Rams could certainly take a step back. You know, if you're a huge Seahawks fan, I'm not going to tell you not to take them to win the division at 3-1. It's a pretty good payout there. 28-1 to win the Super Bowl, though. So Vegas is actually agreeing with me here that this team, yeah, it's solid, but they're probably not going to win the Super Bowl. They're not really there yet. Vegas is saying this team's kind of in the middle there, around 16th. So, you know, I agree. This team would need to get home field advantage for them to win the Super Bowl, in my opinion. I don't think the defense is elite enough yet to travel and win multiple road games. And this offensive line just worries me a lot in terms of traveling and winning road games. So I think this is a team that, if they want to get back to that Super Bowl conversation, is going to have to get into that 11-12 win range and get that home field advantage for the playoffs. So I would not be really taking this team at 28-1 for the Super Bowl. They are plus 135, yes, to make the playoffs. I'd rather just take them to win the division. I don't know if this is going to be a wild card team. The NFC is very deep. I think if this team gets in, it's going to be because the NFC West is a bloodbath and they get in with the tiebreakers at like 9 or 10 wins. So that's going to do it. Seahawks fans, let me know, do you have higher expectations than this? I'm sure there's going to be people that think I'm crazy for saying this team's going to win less games than last year, but you got to keep in mind you can't just copy and paste the standings from the year before. It's a new league framework. Rest of you NFL fans, let me know your thoughts. Too high, too low. Just let me know. We'll see you in a couple days for the next deep dive. Please do hit that like button. Cheers as always. Peace.